Hey vinyl community, it's Mike, MGK Boston. It's been a couple of weeks, so I thought it's best I get back on here and deliver another video. It's always a good time. So today I thought I'd talk about a format that I used to collect a lot in my younger days, the 12-inch single. Predominantly featured as a format in the 80s. In the event that you didn't want to buy the 45 7-inch single, 45 also known as the 7-inch single, you would buy the 12-inch. The 12-inch would typically be sometimes it could be a mini EP with 3 or 4 songs. You get beyond 4, you're getting into a long play. But these would all be played at 45 RPM and often feature an extra track that wouldn't be available. The main single, extended version, whatever you want to call it, would be on the A side typically, and on the B side you would have maybe an alternate version or a song again, a B-side that wasn't available on the album that came out the same year. It was just the DJs would play these because it was good in clubs for dance mixes, etc. You get a dub version, whatever, a disco version, any version, different than the regular radio edit that would be typically featured on the LP. So anyway, diving right in here, we're going back to, it looks like 1979 for this one, Japan. Little glare, sorry about that coming in there. Life in Tokyo. This came out in '79, featuring the vocal stylings of the great David Sylvian. He had a pretty long career. I don't have much of their stuff. I have a singles compilation on CD, and I have this 12-inch. But beyond that, I really have not much of their stuff. But this is really good. It's basically just, it's Life in Tokyo, one version. On the Areola Records label. This was a pressing out of Toronto, Canada. And then the single version, as you can see on the B side, which would be the radio edit. So again, Japan, Life in Tokyo. Look that up on YouTube. It's a great track. Still moving ahead into the 80s. I've mentioned this band a couple of times. This is ABC, featuring the great vocal stylings of Martin Fry. Kind of echoes influences of Brian Ferry and 80s David Bowie, not 70s David Bowie. More the new romantic sound with these guys, strings and all this kind of stuff. And everybody would remember this. This was pretty top 40 at the time, actually. Usually not in my wheelhouse, but I really liked this, the singing. Again, Martin Fry. This is All of My Heart. It was on their debut, Lexicon of Love, released in '82. So as you can see, you've got, there's the extended version, and then on the B side, an instrumental called Overture that wasn't available on Lexicon of Love. And again, 12-inch single. Of course, it's in stereo. All of My Heart. Nice artwork on the back. Kind of reminds me of early Genesis albums in the early '70s. But yeah, All of My Heart. Great song. Lexicon of Love again. Great album. It's top 40, but I mean, the guy could sing. Check it out. Still staying in the 80s here. The Alarm. The Chant Has Just Begun. These guys were from the UK. Toured with U2, Simple Minds, a couple other big hitters in the early years. This is 1984 from their debut, Declaration. So The Chant Has Just Begun, and on the B side, Bells of Rimney, which I don't believe was available on the Declaration album. Looks like I picked this up at the late great Record Peddler on Yonge Street in Toronto. I've mentioned that store a few times. When I was in my younger days, I had grandparents in Toronto, and I'd go up there with my parents. I'd try to venture downtown. And even later on in my university years, if I made a road trip to Toronto, they were still a predominant record store at the time, well into the 90s. And if it was something different, they always had it. Cool staff, and if they didn't have it, they'd order it for you. In the days before the internet, again, The Alarm, The Chant Has Just Begun, 1984. So shifting into a little comedy now, because I like to have a laugh, like we all do. The great Billy Crystal, otherwise known as Fernando Lamas. There he is. There's his alter ego. There's Billy, and there's his alter ego. It's a character he played on Saturday Night Live in the early 80s, Fernando Lamas. He was kind of an aging, supposedly 50s movie star, and he'd hang out in this booth like in Los Angeles and interview celebrities and women he would harass You look marvelous, darling, etc. Terrible. I don't do it justice. But look up a couple of the old clips. Pretty humorous. And if you can believe it, on the B side of this, there's actually a dub version, which is it's not bad. You know, when you take it and you dub it. So there it is, Billy Crystal. Probably one most of you don't have in your collection. I'm not a big novelty guy. I bought this at the time when it came out because I was really into Saturday Night Live and the cast at the time. But yeah, and this is still in great shape. I'd play it at parties. People have a laugh at the time. This came out, 1985. Yeah, again, Billy Crystal. You look marvelous. And here we are in 1982. Bill Nelson. This is more of what I'd call a mini EP than a 12-inch single. Flaming Desire and Other Passions. Bill Nelson, previous to this, in the 70s, was in another band called Bebop Deluxe. I have a package of theirs, like not a greatest hits, but because they weren't really a top 40 band. A greatest hits is a misnomer. Just a collection of their material on CD. And this was something I bought at the time when this came out, just because I really like the song Flaming Desire. Of course, long version. And then there's a few other songs in here. Burning Question is good. But most of the other songs in this are forgettable. I just bought it for Flaming Desire. There was a show I used to listen to at the time on CBC Radio in Canada, late at night. It was called Brave New Waves. On weeknights, it would come on at, I believe, 11 o'clock at night and go till 5 in the morning. And when I was in high school, I'd stay up late at night and I'd make many a mixtape. And then I'd have my list that I would cull from the show, because it was always a really deep track playlist. And when I'd hit the stores in Ottawa and Toronto, as I mentioned, Record Peddler in Toronto, Shake Records was a store in Ottawa, Vinyl Vendor in Kingston, I would find those hard-to-find releases not available in the small town where I was residing at the time. Anyway, moving on. Still in the 80s, however. Like I said, most of these 12-inch singles I procured at the time when they came out. This was a band from England called Blamage. It was two guys, Neil Arthur and Stephen Luscombe, kind of in the same vein as Pet Shop Boys, but not really. In the event that the vocals sounded more like a David Byrne Talking Heads, kind of quirky, different vein, not as poppy as Pet Shop Boys, but still very listenable. This is a song called Blind Vision, of course, 12-inch single. Named after a dessert, I think, that's popular in Europe called Blamage. It's some sort of a jello. Of course, you can see the jello mold and the looks like the 50s mom serving it up. Yeah, and so side 2, Game Above My Head, was not available on the album Happy Families that this came from. Also in 1983-84. Also Blamage from that same period. This is 1982, the year before. A track called Living on the Ceiling. The B-side featured another song called Feel Me. Really excellent track. Look that up. It's on YouTube. I found it on there a few times myself. They're the guys right there. Basically two guys, it's kind of like a DJ keyboard synthesizer, and they had a drum machine. So they did initially have a drummer, and he got kicked to the curb, and they adopted a drum machine. Not uncommon at the time. Axe's Biggest Sisters of Mercy, they called their drum machine Dr. Avalanche. It was not uncommon not to have a drummer for these synth outfits. So again, they're the 12th single, Blamage, Living on the Ceiling. And of course, Blind Vision and Living on the Ceiling both came from this long play. Just thought I'd show this as well. Love the artwork with these guys, kind of funky cartoons. I don't know, I'm not a cartoon guy, but I do like these covers. Happy Families was the name of this. There's a track listing on the back. And again, Happy Families came out in 82, 83. Yeah, 82, 83 split on the London label. When I did the video a couple weeks ago on compilations, I mentioned the London label. It was a really good label at the time. A lot of great bands on that. The London Sampler was a compilation I featured in that video a couple weeks ago. Look it up under MGK Boston. So going back to the homeland for this one, this was a band from Toronto called Breeding Ground. You can see there. Reunion was the name of the track. B-side Slaughter. This was on the Fringe label. It's a label out of Toronto. It featured a lot of alternative and punk rock bands at the time out of Canada. but the label was based in the Toronto area. And this band, pretty good following, I think, around the Toronto area at the time. Nothing special about the interior. You got writing on the A side, and then the B side is blank, just the black and white. Kind of cool. Breeding Ground Reunion. I suggest you look that up. It's an excellent track representative of the mid-'80s period. If you like new wave, alternative, really good. Breeding Ground Reunion. Any of my friends on Facebook, I posted something last night. It was a recent version of a song called Why by Bronski Beat, but it was just Jimmy Somerville in the studio with a couple of session guys. It was more recent, 4 or 5 years ago. This did, however, come out in 1984. Here's the original 12-inch single. That's a caricature of Jimmy Somerville, the lead vocalist. The guy, super high tenor, really interesting voice. You can see on the back here. So there's the lyrics for Why. A lot of gay advocacy with Bronski Beat, and Jimmy Somerville was just such a great frontman and a nice guy when you see him in any interviews. He later went on to form another band after Bronski Beat called the Communards, as well as did some pretty good solo stuff on his own. Close to the Edge on the B side is not, I don't believe, available on the Age of Consent. That was just on the 12-inch single. Nothing special here on the inside. Why across the label. Again, they were also on the London record label that I just mentioned a moment ago, Bronski Beat, and they were actually, I think, on that London sampler that I highlighted in my compilation video a couple weeks ago. Again, Why? Look this up if you don't know it already. Yeah, just he's an amazing vocalist. You're missing out if you don't give it a shot. Jimmy Somerville and Bronski Beat. Also, Bronski Beat, I just thought I'd throw this one in. I don't have a lot of 10-inch singles in my collection. I featured a Killing Joke live, recorded at Larry's Hideaway in Toronto in one of my early videos when I started the YouTube channel. And this is probably one of the only 3 or 4 10-inch I have in the collection. As you can see, it's a limited edition mega mix. This is Bronski Beat, actually with Mark Allman. I Feel Love. It's a cover of a Donna Summer song from, I believe, 1976. Disco classic. And they really do it justice on this. I believe, let's see here, there's, yeah, Love to Love You Baby into I Feel Love, full mix here. And then on the B side, yeah, just a different version. They call it the cake mix, but each clocking in at around 7 or 8 minutes. And again, store I mentioned earlier, there it is, the Vinyl Vendor, Kingston, Ontario. Bought a lot of good stuff there. Yeah, so when I catalog this on Discogs, it's still available. You can buy it out there. It's really good. If you like disco at all, these guys give it a real interesting twist. And of course, with Mark Allman from Soft Cell, he brought an interesting synth aesthetic already into this, and Jimmy Somerville, of course, is the vocalist, is not to be missed. So Bronski Beat, I Feel Love. Donna Summer cover. Of course, again, as I've said, sticking in the 80s for most of this stuff. A band called the Comsat Angels, also known as the CS Angels for short. This was a 4-song, I call this a 4-song EP, more than a 12-inch single. However, there's a remix of You Move Me, which was not available on the album that came out. Land was the album release in 1983 that wasn't on that album. Of course, Independence Day was on that album, and Day One were both on the 1983 release Land. And Will You Stay Tonight was actually, these are just alternate versions. This is a Canadian pressing, not available in England at the time. Don't know why. It's on this Jive label. I don't know much about it. Again, I bought this when it came out. Don't even remember where I picked this up. It's somewhere in Ontario, but yeah, these guys are pretty good. If you like early Simple Minds, check out Comsat Angels. They're definitely worth it. Again, the highlight for this is a song called You Move Me. One Good Reason in brackets is part of the chorus, so they highlighted that in brackets, but You Move Me. It's an excellent track by the Comsat Angels. Sticking in the UK, particularly in London, a band called Felt. Felt were, I guess you would call them, when you look at newer bands from the early 2000s, like Camera Obscura and Bell and Sebastian, kind of with the melancholy, quirky humor mixed into it. Then you have Felt. I'm sure they would cite Felt as an early influence. This is a 12-inch single on the Cherry Red label. As you can see, A-side, Penelope Tree. Penelope Tree was actually a British supermodel in the 60s. Kind of their version of Twiggy, exceptionally thin woman, very successful career. Later went on, I looked her up on Wikipedia, later married a musician and moved to Australia, then drifted off the radar by the mid-70s. She made a movie appearance in that satirical film called The Ruddles, but beyond that I don't know much about her. Of course, you have on this a B-side called A Preacher in New England. It's kind of a slow song, not particularly good. The album that this came from, Pillows and Prayers, is very good. I only have it on CD, a reissue of it. It's worth seeking out, Pillows and Prayers, but the song Penelope Tree by Felt right here is it's great. If you like Camera Obscura again, or Bell and Sebastian, I highly recommend Felt, Penelope Tree, if not just for the one song. If you like either of those bands, you're definitely going to like this. So Felt, Penelope Tree. And there she is, the beauty she was. All right. This was a band, I don't know much about these guys, kind of a one-off, called the Flower Pot Men. Kind of, I think it's again like a couple of guys just in a studio, not real musicians, just jerking around with keyboards and sampling and whatnot. This is actually a cover of Walk on Gilded Splinters, originally by Dr. John, of course, the Louisiana legend. I believe his original version was 1967-68. Not that it matters. But yeah, they of course give him credit here. And on this you have two versions of Walk on Gilded Splinters. I heard this in a club I used to frequent in Hull, Quebec, a place called Club Zinc, legendary to any of my friends from Eastern Ontario at the time. Sorry for the reflection. This is late afternoon, so there you can get a look at it. It's sort of, oh, bloody hell. Anyway, yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, again, two versions. Again, playing in the background there was the House Martins. I'm going to get to them in a second. Too lazy to get up and flip the record over. It's one of the hazards of records, huh? All right. So, not novelty. Actually, I think these guys were quite a talent, actually. They were produced by the great Trevor Horn. Of course, Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Little bondage going on outfit, not part of the Mike Kelly 2020 summer collection, that wardrobe, but seems to work for this album cover. This is, of course, Relax, was their biggest single. This came out in 1983. Anybody watching Much Music in Canada or MTV at the time was well aware of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Came out the fall of that year, I believe, and they made great videos. This is an excellent song, of course, that everybody knows. Two Tribes is a really excellent video. They got a little political even. Holly Johnson, people write these guys off, but I think Holly Johnson was actually a really good singer. And you can see here, there's a photo of the guys right there. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So on this, of course, there's an instrumental version on one side. And then, of course, on the main side, you get a dub version, or no, is that a dub version? What? Long version. There it is. Yeah, I haven't had this out in a long time. May have to give it a spin. But yeah, Relax, Frankie Goes to Hollywood 12-inch single. And I'd be remiss if I also didn't point this one out. Commonly played during the Christmas season. It became kind of a Christmas anthem for these guys, The Power of Love. This was also on the double album that they released in 1983, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. It's a beautiful ballad. Here on the back, you have pictures of the band, and just little captions, each guy's thoughts at the time. Always interesting. It's kind of a lost art with that. Just stories the band might write on the back and giving credit to their producer and etc. There they are in Hollywood. How ironic. They did go to Hollywood. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So yeah, just this features. Two versions, yeah. And there's a song called Scrapped and Trapped. But that's mostly forgettable. But I bought this just because I really like the song Power Love, and it's a 7-minute version. The version on Welcome to Pleasure Dome is the radio edit, and it's more, I think it's around, clocks in around 4.5. This is really good. I got it used probably for a couple of bucks at the time, like about half my collection. Even back then, I bought new releases, of course, but I also bought used stuff back then. As I just mentioned, a band, another band from England. It's called the House Martins. The great vocal stylings of Paul Heaton. This was just a collection of alternate takes from an album that came out the same year. London Zero, Hull 4 was the album. I bought this. This is predominantly for the version of Sheep. It's a longer version of it. And I'll set that down. So on the back, yeah, you can see. Here's the track listing. These songs were all on London Zero, Hull 4. However, they're just alternate versions. And there's a great version on here of Curtis Mayfield's People Get Ready. Of course, there's some notes here. And there's pictures of the band. Yeah, they were kind of, if you're an early first Smiths album, a couple of Smiths albums, you'll definitely like the House Martins. Yeah, so Sheep, that was called. Of course, the House Martins only did those first 2 albums, unfortunately, and that was the end of them. But yeah, definitely a band worth seeking out. Lone Justice, featuring the vocal stylings of Maria McKee. This is a 12 of Sweet Sweet Baby I'm Falling. You can see here, it's still in the shrink. There she is, Maria McKee. A lot of anticipation from the record label at the time. Here's the label it was on, their self-titled debut, Lone Justice. A lot of hype. Mike Campbell from Tom Petty was on this. Jimmy Iovine was brought in to produce. A lot of money thrown at these guys. And they were really an indie band, and it was overkill. And I think that's why it kind of strangled them a bit, because their second album, Shelter, did poorly. This was kind of the one that, you know, it would have made them, but it was kind of, I think, too much for the band. Just the hype and the tension, and it really went nowhere. They did tour with U2 when this came out in 1985, so that was probably the War album. They played several dates with U2, which was going to give them exposure, and it just didn't, unfortunately, pan out. But Maria McKee is a terrific vocalist. Yeah, you just can't miss that first Lone Justice album. Again, Shelter's forgettable. Don't bother with it. I have it. I keep it along just because there's 1 or 2 songs, but most of it's filler, and it's just not very good. Okay, still in the 80s, The Mission. These guys were kind of, I won't say a spin-off, but Wayne Hussey was a guitarist with the Sisters of Mercy, a band I mentioned earlier, and just wasn't getting along with Andrew Eldritch, the main guy in the Sisters, and he branched out on his own and didn't form, Wayne Hussey that is, and formed The Mission in 1985. After he appeared on the First and Last and Always album with the Sisters of Mercy, no soon after that, he formed The Mission. They did this as a prelude to their debut album, God's Own Medicine, which came out in late 1986. They did this, it's a 3-song, I call it a 3-song EP, but predominantly Serpent's Kiss. There's an extended version of this song. Serpent's Kiss was not on God's Own Medicine. This is a standalone single. Of course, there's Wayne Hussey right there. Really amazing frontman. Funny story with Wayne Hussey. I saw him in 1987 open for The Mission, that is. They opened for the Psychedelic Furs that summer in Ottawa, a venue called the Congress Center. Not sure if I think it's called something else these days. But the funny story being, the radio station I listened to predominantly from Carleton University, I lived about an hour away from there. I wasn't attending the university yet, but I was to go there in the fall. And I always used to listen to it late at night, again, CKCU. And the jock one night was just giving away tickets because the Psychedelic Furs were coming. And he said, call now and tell me a song on the first Psychedelic Furs album with a country in the title. So I called up, and after midnight, and obviously I don't know, the guy had 2 or 3 listeners, and of course I scored 4 tickets. Here's the Psychedelic Furs debut, and the song, of course, India. I have 4 tickets to that, and my friends of mine, I know they watch these videos, my friends Paul and Jeff, and it escapes me who the 4th was. I can't remember. Maybe guys in the comments, who was the 4th guy that went to us with us to that show. But such a loud show it was. You know, and Richard Butler is such a good front man. He was out there holding the spotlight, doing that thing that he used to do. And the saxophone was always an interesting element because they were kind of a new wave, you know, I would call them post-punk, but yeah, just an interesting approach. And of course, yeah, Richard Butler's Tim Butler was the bass player. And of course, this is their debut, Psychedelic Furs, self-titled. I believe this came out in 1980. Yeah, and still I've got it. It's in great shape. I probably bought this in my 2nd or 3rd year of high school. But yeah, I love this album. I love the Furs. Saw them a couple years later on the Mirror Moves tour. I think that was up at Kingswood Music Theatre, Canada's Wonderland. I can't remember who they played with on that tour. But yeah, I saw them twice way back. And they're still playing. My friend Diane, I know she watches these videos. She's a huge fan. And I think she's probably seen them more times than I have. But not because I wouldn't want to. Big fan of the Furs. Just a little sidetrack there. I like to throw an amusing anecdote in once in a while to keep things interesting. Keeping things interesting, that show I mentioned earlier that I used to listen to a lot on CBC, Brave New Waves, I'd hear just wacky stuff, independent stuff you just never hear anywhere else. This was an indie band from the Montreal area called Haunting Today. There they are. It was kind of like a goth, yeah, I'd call them goth, just gothic, in the vein of Sisters of Mercy. I bought this predominantly at the time for Aquarius. So this is a cover of the Fifth Dimension song, whenever that came out, 66, 67. Look this up. It is on YouTube. There's not a video, just there's an audio download on YouTube of their cover of Aquarius. It's bizarre. It's like hearing Bauhaus or Sisters of Mercy cover Aquarius, and these guys, phenomenal. Actually, the production for this, being an indie, it's and there's 6 songs on this. The lead singer oddly calls herself called Beach. Interesting, but yeah, good stuff. Haunting Today on Dernier Records. Sure, that was just an indie label in Quebec at the time. As you can see, there's Quebec. But yeah, Haunting Today. Look that up on YouTube. Aquarius. You will dig it. Almost getting to the end here. I'm running a little long today. I'm doing about 18 or 19 selections. So I think I'm around 17 here. The great Pete Wiley, a song called Come Back. On this, there's 2 versions. Holiday Romance version, it's called. It clocks in around 7 or 8 minutes. And on the other side, another version, combined and extended Story of the Reds. Interesting guy, Pete Wiley. Didn't do a whole lot beyond wah, but he still played solo. He's out of Liverpool, England. And the backup singer on this was Josie Jones. She's sadly no longer with us. I had a big crush on her at the time. Tall blonde, great singer, kind of a punk rock aesthetic look, and kind of always funny in interviews. At Top of the Pops interviews, I saw a couple with them, Pete Wiley and her. I don't know if they were a thing at the time, but she sang with him, Josie Jones, on the album Wah, which I don't have the long play. It's on an album called Word to the Wise Guy. It is available. I've seen it out there. I've never seen it in the shops. But this came out on 84 on Beggar's Banquet. Yeah, Wah, Come Back. Beautiful pop song. I call it alternative pop from the UK. Definitely look this up. Come Back by Wah. Excellent, excellent. Can't recommend that enough. One of those you can listen to a few times in a row because you just don't get tired of it quickly. Jesus and Mary Chain, April Skies. This is an extended version of April Skies, of course. As I just mentioned, April Skies. There's Jesus and Mary Chain. I bought this predominantly, this was on their second album, Darklands. I have Darklands on compact disc. It's actually one of the first compact discs I bought in the late 80s when I was starting to buy CDs. I realized, oh, these things are finally the way of the future, supposedly, so I switched buying a lot of CDs at the time. But I was kind of buying half and half records until I got into the 90s, and I was buying predominantly CDs for a number of years. But anyway, back on track here. I bought this predominantly for... There's two songs on the B-side. Kill Surf City, that's an original, kind of riffing on the Jan and Dean Surf City. Ironically, I did live in Huntington Beach, California for the time. found this kind of an amusing song, Kill Surf City. Not in a bad way, it's just kind of a funny take on the Jan and Dean thing. And of course, Who Do You Love? That's an old blues song. Not sure who that was originally, but it doesn't matter. It's a great version of it. Yeah, Jesus and Mary Chain. April Skies, long 12-inch version from the Darklands album released 1987. And lastly, a little more humor at the end here. The Bullock Brothers. This was one I heard also on that program I mentioned earlier, Brave New Waves on the CBC. The slow removal of Vincent van Gogh's left ear. These guys were kind of, I would call a novelty act, but actually if you heard this in an alternative dark club at the time, this would have sounded like early Ministry. It's really not bad. Youth from Killing Joke actually produced this, and yeah, and Geordie's on this. Another guy from that played guitar, he's on this. So clearly these guys were liked in that community, you know, musicians at the time. And this was released, I want to say 82. Yeah. So as the story goes, I couldn't remember the whole story about the artist Vincent van Gogh and what happened to his left ear exactly. So I looked it up on Wikipedia earlier today. He was friends with the artist Gauguin in the late 1800s, and he had several mental issues, Van Gogh did. And I guess they had a heated argument one day, him and Gauguin. His first name escapes me, it doesn't matter. I'm not an art critic, I'm just telling a funny story. So the argument got to the point where I guess Van Gogh lost his stuff, and he proceeded to remove his left ear. So hell of a way to prove your point in an argument. But he died a few years later. He had alcohol dependency issues and a drug problem at the time. Whoever knows what drugs they were doing at that time. But anyway, just a sidetrack there on the story of Vincent van Gogh's left ear and what actually happened to it. So look up this song. You'll have a laugh. It's actually pretty good. Put the headphones on, crank it up. There's some humor. And there's, of course, Bela Lugosi on the cover. Scary. From what movie, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's kind of a cool cover rather. And again, this was another one I bought at the legendary vinyl vendor in Kingston, Ontario. So folks, that's another one wrapped up for another week. I hope you enjoyed the topic. 12-inch singles, don't buy them anymore. If I see something unique, yeah, I'll pick it up. I picked something up a week ago on red vinyl, saving that for another video. So I'll bring that up at that time. But yeah, so 80s was a time I was collecting a lot of interesting stuff in my younger days. I'm still collecting interesting stuff, but I like to go back and revisit these things that I haven't looked at in 25, 30 years at least, as we're all getting older. So I hope everybody has a great weekend. It's Friday. I usually make my videos on Saturday. I'm mixing it up. So the weather's great. It's about 75 degrees here in the greater Boston area. Summer is around the corner, literally. It may be here already. So I wish you all well. Stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.